My name is Bernard Walker, 68 years old, and I just buried Margaret, my wife of 45 years. At the will reading, my daughter-in-law Amanda stood up, face contorted with rage, and screamed, "Get out of our lives and keep that old ranch." I accepted her cruel words in silence. Nobody knew that 1 week later, what I found in the ranch basement would make my phone ring 62 times in a single day. Greed has a way of destroying people from the inside out. Before I tell you this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you want to hear how one woman's greed cost her everything while an old man's patience revealed an unexpected treasure. I was born in a small town in rural Montana, where my parents worked the land from sunrise to sunset. They weren't wealthy by any means, but they taught me the value of hard work and integrity. Those lessons shaped me into the man I am today, though I've been tested more than I ever thought possible in my sunset years. I met Margaret during our sophomore year at the University of Wyoming. I was studying agriculture with dreams of improving farming techniques, while she was pursuing library science. We first locked eyes across the university library, where she worked part-time. I had come in to research crop rotation methods, but instead found myself returning day after day just to see her smile. She had these bright blue eyes that crinkled at the corners when she laughed, and a quiet intelligence that drew me in like a magnet. Our courtship was simple by today's standards: movies at the local theater, picnics by the lake, and long walks through campus discussing our dreams for the future. I proposed to her under a cottonwood tree in spring of '77, and we married in a small ceremony in May of '78. Margaret looked radiant in her simple white dress, holding wildflowers instead of store-bought roses. She always preferred natural beauty to artificial displays. After graduation, I secured a position as an agricultural consultant for the state extension office, helping local farmers implement sustainable practices. Margaret became a school librarian, inspiring generations of young minds to explore the world through books. We settled in Cheyenne, bought a modest house, and welcomed our son Thomas 2 years later. Thomas was always a sensitive child, quick to tears but equally quick to laugh. Margaret doted on him, reading him stories every night before bed. I taught him about the land, taking him fishing and camping whenever I could. As he grew older, I noticed how easily influenced he was by his peers. He desperately wanted to fit in, sometimes at the expense of his own interests or values. Margaret worried about this trait, but I assured her he would grow out of it. I realize now I should have listened to her concerns more carefully. 15 years ago, as retirement approached, Margaret and I purchased an 80-acre ranch about 2 hours from Cheyenne. The property featured a weathered 2-story farmhouse, a large barn, and rolling pastures bordered by a small creek. It wasn't much to look at initially, but we saw its potential. The price was surprisingly reasonable, which I attributed to the remote location and the property's need for renovation. Every weekend, we would drive out to the ranch to work on improvements. I focused on structural repairs and land management, while Margaret planted gardens and decorated the interior. She developed an unusual fascination with the property's history, collecting old maps and documents from the county recorder's office. When I asked about her research, she would smile mysteriously and say she was just getting to know our land better. I thought it was simply her librarian's curiosity at work. Thomas went off to college at 18, choosing to study law at the University of Denver. We were proud but surprised by his choice, as he had never shown particular interest in legal matters before. During his second year of law school, he met Amanda Harrison, a fellow law student from an affluent Connecticut family. The first time Thomas brought Amanda home to meet us, she charmed us completely. She was strikingly beautiful with long auburn hair and impeccable style. More impressively, she was articulate, intelligent, and seemed genuinely interested in our lives. She asked thoughtful questions about Margaret's library work and my agricultural projects. She even expressed enthusiasm about our ranch, asking detailed questions about the property that Margaret was delighted to answer. Their wedding 8 years ago was an elaborate affair, largely planned and paid for by Amanda's parents. Margaret and I contributed what we could, including a generous cash gift to help them get established. We also gave them Margaret's grandmother's antique silver serving set, a family heirloom that Amanda had admired. Thomas looked happier than I had ever seen him, and we were hopeful about their future together. However, after the honeymoon, we began to notice subtle changes in Amanda's behavior toward us. The warm phone calls became less frequent, and her questions about our lives ceased altogether. Instead, conversations centered around their accomplishments, their purchases, and their social connections. Thomas secured a position at a prestigious Denver law firm, clearly influenced by Amanda's career aspirations. Their lifestyle grew increasingly lavish. They purchased an expensive home in Cherry Creek, one of Denver's most exclusive neighborhoods. Amanda drove a luxury German SUV, while Thomas traded in his practical sedan for a sports car. Their vacations to exotic locations appeared regularly on social media, always with Amanda posed perfectly in designer outfits. When they visited us, which became increasingly rare, Amanda would subtly wrinkle her nose at our modest home or make comments about how we could upgrade certain aspects of our living situation. The distance between Thomas and us grew wider with each passing year. Holidays became brief, obligatory visits, rather than meaningful family time. Margaret noticed that Thomas rarely spoke without first glancing at Amanda, as if seeking her approval. When alone with him, Margaret would try to reconnect, but Thomas had become a master at deflecting personal conversations. I know it broke Margaret's heart, though she never complained. 18 months ago, Margaret was diagnosed with aggressive pancreatic cancer. The prognosis was grim from the start, but my Margaret faced it with the same quiet courage she had shown throughout our marriage. During her final months, she insisted on updating our will, showing unusual urgency about the ranch property in particular. "Bernard," she said one evening as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, "promise me the ranch will stay in the family. Don't let anyone convince you to sell it to developers, no matter what." I promised without hesitation, though I was puzzled by her insistence. The ranch was modest compared to the luxury properties being built in some parts of Wyoming. Why would developers be interested in our remote land? Margaret passed away peacefully with me, holding her hand on a quiet Tuesday morning. Thomas flew in from a business trip that afternoon, Amanda arriving the next day, complaining about having to reschedule important meetings. At the funeral, I noticed Amanda spending more time examining Margaret's jewelry than mourning her passing. When Margaret's sister offered Amanda a memory box of photos, Amanda politely declined, saying they didn't have room for more clutter. The week following the funeral was the loneliest of my life. Friends brought casseroles and offered condolences, but nights were unbearably silent without Margaret's gentle breathing beside me. Thomas called once, briefly, before flying to Los Angeles for a case. I wandered through our house, touching Margaret's things, trying to hold on to the feeling of her presence for as long as possible. Each night, I fell asleep clutching her pillow, breathing in the fading scent of her lavender shampoo. 7 days after the funeral, we gathered at attorney Franklin Wilson's office in downtown Cheyenne for the reading of Margaret's will. Franklin had been our friend and legal advisor for over 30 years, handling everything from our home purchase to various investment decisions. His office was located in a converted Victorian house, with dark wood paneling and leather furniture that had seen better days. The conference room felt stuffy, despite the ceiling fan spinning lazily overhead. Present were myself, Thomas, Amanda, my sister Laura, who had flown in from Arizona, and Margaret's cousin Patricia from Seattle. Laura had brought a tray of Margaret's favorite lemon cookies, which sat untouched on the side table. Thomas and Amanda arrived 20 minutes late, causing Franklin to restart his preliminary comments. Amanda wore a black designer dress that seemed more appropriate for a cocktail party than a will reading, complemented by what appeared to be new diamond earrings. Throughout Franklin's explanation of the legal process, she checked her watch repeatedly and exchanged text messages on her phone, barely attempting to hide her impatience. "Now then," Franklin said, adjusting his reading glasses and opening the folder containing Margaret's will. "I'll begin with the distribution of assets." The document was straightforward. Our modest savings and investments, totaling just under $300,000, were to be split, with 70% going to me and 30% to Thomas. Our Cheyenne house would remain solely in my name. Margaret's personal jewelry was divided specifically, with her mother's pearl necklace going to Laura and her grandmother's brooch to Patricia. Amanda was left Margaret's gold bracelet, which I had given Margaret on our 25th anniversary. Then came the clause about the ranch property that changed everything. The 80-acre property and all structures located at 470 Elk Ridge Road, Harmony County, Wyoming, are to remain solely in the possession of my husband, Bernard Walker, Franklin read. It is my explicit wish that this property never be sold to developers or mining interests, but rather maintained as a natural space and eventually placed in a conservation trust. I noticed Amanda's face flush and her fingers tighten around her designer purse. Thomas shifted uncomfortably in his seat, stealing a glance at his wife. "That's it?" Amanda suddenly interrupted. "What about investment accounts? Retirement funds? There must be more." Franklin looked up, his expression professionally neutral. "I've covered all assets specified in the will, Mrs. Walker." Amanda stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "This is ridiculous. That worthless ranch in the middle of nowhere? What about Thomas? What about our future?" The room fell silent. Laura and Patricia exchanged shocked glances. "Amanda, please," Thomas whispered, reaching for her arm. She jerked away from him. "No, your mother never liked me, and this proves it." She turned to me, her eyes flashing with undisguised hostility. "Get out of our lives and keep that old ranch. We don't need your charity or your judgment." Franklin cleared his throat. "Mrs. Walker, I can assure you this document was prepared with Mrs. Margaret Walker of sound mind and without coercion. If you wish to contest the will, that is your legal right. But I must advise you that such challenges rarely succeed without substantial evidence. My mother-in-law was dying of cancer and on heavy medication." Amanda snapped. How sound could her mind have been? "Amanda!" This time it was Laura who spoke, her voice trembling with anger. "Margaret was my sister, and she was sharper in her final days than most people are in their prime. How dare you suggest otherwise?" Patricia nodded in agreement, tears streaming down her wrinkled cheeks. Throughout this exchange, I remained silent, watching my son's face. Thomas looked torn, clearly upset by his wife's outburst, but not disagreeing with her sentiments. When our eyes met briefly, he looked away, unable to hold my gaze. "I think we should go," Amanda declared, grabbing her purse. "Thomas, we're leaving. Our lawyer will be in touch." She stormed out, heels clicking aggressively on the hardwood. Thomas hesitated, looking back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, before following his wife. "Bernard, I'm so sorry," Laura said, placing her hand on my shoulder. Franklin sighed heavily. "I've seen many will readings in my career, but that reaction was unusual. Are you all right, Bernard?" I nodded, though I felt hollow inside. Margaret knew exactly what she was doing. She always did. The drive home was painful. Every song on the radio reminded me of Margaret, but the silence when I turned it off was even worse. I kept replaying Amanda's words in my mind, wondering how our family had come to this point. Had Margaret and I failed somehow in raising Thomas? Had we missed warning signs about Amanda's true character? Later that evening, a text message arrived from Thomas. "Mom never liked Amanda. That's why she did this." No apology. No acknowledgement of his own behavior. Just shifting blame to his mother who couldn't defend herself. I turned off my phone without responding, sat in Margaret's reading chair, and wept for the first time since her passing. Not just for her loss, but for the realization that my son had chosen his wife's greed over his parents' love. The days following the will reading blended together in a fog of grief. Our house, once filled with Margaret's laughter and warmth, now felt like a museum of memories too painful to visit but too precious to ignore. Friends called regularly, but their well-meaning questions about Thomas only deepened my sadness. How could I explain that my only child had essentially abandoned me at my most vulnerable moment? 3 days after the will reading, Thomas called. I could tell immediately that Amanda was in the room with him, her voice audible in the background. "Dad, how are you holding up?" Thomas asked, his tone professionally concerned rather than genuinely caring. "I'm managing," I replied, not wanting to burden him with the truth. "We've been thinking," he continued, clearly reciting rehearsed lines. "That big house must be a lot for you to maintain alone. Have you considered selling and moving into something smaller? Maybe a retirement community where you'd have people around?" In the background, I could hear Amanda whispering urgently. Thomas covered the phone poorly, and I caught fragments. "Ask about the ranch too, and don't forget to mention the realtor." "Actually," I said, cutting off his pitch, "I was thinking about spending some time at the ranch. Getting away might do me good." A pause. "The ranch? But it's so isolated, Dad. What if something happened to you out there?" The sudden concern in his voice struck me as disingenuous after years of minimal contact. "I've been taking care of myself and your mother for decades, son. I'll be fine." After ending the call, I made my decision. I packed a small suitcase, secured the house, and began the 2-hour drive to the ranch the following morning. As I traveled the familiar route, memories of similar journeys with Margaret filled my mind. Her excitement as we crossed into Harmony County. The way she would roll down the window regardless of weather to smell the sage and pine. Her hand resting comfortably on mine as we discussed plans for the property. The ranch looked neglected when I arrived, which was understandable given Margaret's illness had prevented our regular visits for months. The grass around the farmhouse had grown knee-high, and dust covered every surface inside. Yet despite the neglect, there was something comforting about being there, as if Margaret's spirit lingered more strongly on this land she had loved so dearly. After unloading my car, I walked the property, reacquainting myself with its features. The barn needed some roof repairs, and the fence along the eastern boundary had partially collapsed. Making a mental list of tasks gave me purpose, something I had been lacking since Margaret's death. Most surprising was Margaret's garden behind the house. Despite months of neglect, several hardy perennials she had planted were still thriving. Lavender, sage, and black-eyed Susans created splashes of color among the weeds. It felt like a message from her, a reminder of life's persistence, even after great loss. As evening approached, I entered the master bedroom, another space filled with Margaret's presence. Her reading glasses still sat on the nightstand next to a stack of books about local geology and Wyoming history. Opening the drawer of her bedside table, I found several of her personal journals and a photo album I hadn't seen before. The journals contained entries from the past 5 years, many focused on the ranch. Margaret had documented seasonal changes, wildlife sightings, and renovation projects. But scattered throughout were cryptic notes that caught my attention. Another promising test result from the South Field, and must research ethical development options for what lies beneath. The photo album contained pictures from our early days working on the ranch. Margaret smiling proudly in front of her newly planted garden. Me fixing the porch railing. Both of us enjoying sunset picnics with the mountains in the background. The final pages showed close-up photographs of various soil samples and rock formations on the property, each carefully labeled with coordinates and dates. On her bookshelf, I found several volumes about Wyoming geology, with specific pages marked. The sections she had highlighted all related to mineral deposits common in this region of Wyoming. One book had a business card tucked inside from a geological survey company based in Laramie. That night, I slept in our bed for the first time, without Margaret beside me. Despite my grief, I fell into the deepest sleep I'd had since her passing. In my dreams, Margaret walked with me across the ranch, pointing toward the ground and saying, "Look deeper, Bernard. I left you everything you need." I woke just after sunrise with a strange sense of purpose. Margaret had always been methodical and intentional. Nothing in her actions was ever random or without meaning. Her interest in the geology of our land, her insistence that the ranch never be sold to developers or mining interests, her careful documentation, all of it suggested she had discovered something significant. As I made coffee in the kitchen, my phone rang. It was Thomas. "Dad, just checking in. How's the ranch?" "Needs some work, but it's good to be here," I replied, noticing a new tension in his voice. So, what are your plans for the place? Long term, I mean. Haven't given it much thought yet. Why? A pause. Just wondering. Amanda and I were talking, and despite what happened at the will reading, we want to be involved in your life. Maybe we could come visit the ranch sometime soon, see if it needs any improvements? The sudden interest in a property they had previously dismissed as worthless raised my suspicions further. Sure, son. Maybe in a few weeks when I've had time to settle in. After hanging up, I stood in the kitchen, coffee forgotten in my hand. Something wasn't right. Margaret's research materials, Thomas's newfound interest in the ranch, Amanda's extreme reaction to the will these pieces were forming. A picture I couldn't quite make out yet, but I was determined to uncover the truth. With newfound determination, I began a methodical exploration of the ranch house. Each room might contain clues to what Margaret had discovered, what was valuable enough to protect with her final legal act. Margaret's home office yielded the first significant finds. Her desk contained folders filled with maps of our property, soil survey reports, and correspondence with several geological experts. Most documents dated back 3 to 4 years, suggesting this had been a long-term project she had kept to herself. In the corner stood a locked filing cabinet I had never paid much attention to before. I searched the office for the key, but came up empty. Then I remembered Margaret's lifelong habit of hiding important keys in her jewelry box, a carved wooden container her father had made for her 16th birthday. I found the jewelry box on her dresser in the bedroom. Inside were the few pieces she hadn't specifically designated in her will. Lifting the velvet lining at the bottom, I discovered a small key taped securely in place, just as I had suspected. The filing cabinet opened smoothly, revealing neatly organized folders, labeled by date and content. The most recent files contained detailed correspondence with 3 different geological survey companies, all confirming the same remarkable finding. Our worthless ranch sat atop significant deposits of rare earth elements, minerals crucial for electronics manufacturing and renewable energy technologies. One report estimated the potential value in the tens of millions if properly developed. Another outlined how extraction could be done with minimal environmental impact using new technologies. Margaret had highlighted sections about responsible mining practices and sustainable development. At the bottom of the final drawer, I found a sealed envelope with my name written in Margaret's elegant handwriting. Across the front, she had written, "Open only after the will reading." My hands trembled as I broke the seal. Inside was a 4-page letter written during her final weeks. "My dearest Bernard," it began. "If you're reading this, then I've moved on from this world, and you've learned about my decision regarding the ranch. I owe you an explanation." Margaret went on to describe how she had first suspected the presence of valuable minerals 3 years earlier, while researching the history of the property. An old geological survey from the 1950s mentioned promising indicators, but had been largely forgotten. Using her librarian's research skills, she had quietly investigated further. "I confirmed my suspicions 2 years ago," she wrote, "but kept my findings private after watching how Amanda's influence over Thomas grew increasingly concerning. Her materialism and status-seeking reminded me too much of the developers who have destroyed so much of Wyoming's natural beauty for profit." The letter continued, "I've watched our son become someone I barely recognize, Bernard. Amanda's values have replaced those we taught him. When I realized the potential value of our land, I knew immediately that in their hands, it would be exploited for maximum profit, with no regard for the environmental consequences or the local community." Margaret had consulted with Franklin Wilson about the best way to protect the property. The solution was her carefully worded will, ensuring the ranch stayed solely with me, the person she trusted to handle this discovery responsibly. "Contact George Winters," the letter instructed, providing a phone number. "He's an ethical mining consultant and an old friend from my library days. His brother was a geology professor. George can help you navigate the development of these resources in a way that honors the land and benefits the community." The letter ended with words that brought tears to my eyes. "I'm sorry for keeping this from you, my love. but I needed to protect you from Amanda's potential legal maneuvers while I was too ill to fight. Use this gift wisely, help others with it, and know that I will love you through eternity. Your Margaret. I sat with the letter in my hands for a long while, overcome with emotion. Even in death, Margaret was protecting our family and our values. Her foresight was remarkable, but not surprising. She had always been the wiser of us two. With the letter still clutched in my hand, I noticed a detail in the kitchen that had escaped my attention. The large pantry had shelving that didn't quite match the wall dimensions. Pushing against the back panel, I discovered it moved slightly. After removing the canned goods from the shelves, I found the hidden mechanism, a simple latch disguised as a nail head. The panel swung open to reveal a narrow staircase leading down. With only my phone flashlight to guide me, I descended into a basement I hadn't known existed. The space had been converted into a makeshift laboratory and office. Tables held dozens of labeled soil samples, testing equipment, and a microscope. One wall was covered entirely with maps showing survey results across different sections of our property, with the most promising areas circled in red. A large table in the center held what appeared to be a development plan, showing how the resources could be extracted while preserving most of the natural landscape. Detailed notes outlined a timeline and potential partners who shared Margaret's environmental values. Next to the plans was another sealed envelope, this one labeled simply Plan B. Inside was a second letter, shorter than the first. Bernard, if you're reading this, you've discovered my research space. This room contains everything you need to prove the value of our land should legal challenges arise. The thumb drive in the desk drawer contains digital copies of all reports and correspondence. The combination to the safe behind the geological map is 38-23-45, our wedding date. My hope is that you'll use this discovery to help others while preserving our beautiful land. Perhaps a foundation to support environmental education, or funding for the local schools that have struggled so much lately. The wealth hidden beneath our ranch can do tremendous good if managed with integrity. I trust you completely, my love. You've always had the kindest heart of anyone I've known. I found the small safe exactly where she had described and opened it using our wedding date. Inside was additional documentation, including the original deed to the property, certificates of mineral rights ownership, and several legal opinions confirming our full rights to any resources discovered. Standing in Margaret's secret workspace, surrounded by evidence of her brilliant mind and loving heart, I finally broke down completely. I grieved not just for her loss, but in awe of how thoroughly she had prepared for this moment, how carefully she had protected what mattered most to us. Through my tears, I felt something else emerging, determination to honor her final wishes, and perhaps, just maybe, a chance to reconnect with our son once he understood the full truth. The following morning, I called George Winters, using the number Margaret had provided in her letter. He answered on the second ring, his voice gruff but kind. "Bernard Walker? Margaret told me you might be calling someday. I'm sorry for your loss. She was an extraordinary woman. We arranged to meet at the ranch the next day. George turned out to be a weathered man in his 70s, with intelligent eyes and calloused hands that spoke of a life split between academic pursuits and practical field work. He walked the property with me, examining Margaret's samples and reviewing her documentation. Your wife was brilliant, Bernard. This is significant, he confirmed after several hours of investigation. These deposits are valuable not just for their rarity, but for their concentration and relative accessibility. Margaret's research is thorough and accurate. George explained the options moving forward, which companies had ethical reputations, how development could proceed with minimal environmental impact, and the potential economic benefits for the local community that had been struggling since the lumber mill closed 10 years earlier. Take your time deciding how to proceed, he advised before leaving. These minerals aren't going anywhere, and watch out for vultures. Word about discoveries like this has a way of getting out, no matter how careful you are. His prediction proved accurate sooner than I expected. By the next afternoon, I had received calls from 3 different mining companies, somehow hearing through industry channels about potential rare earth elements on my property. Each caller was carefully vague about their source of information. Driving into the small town of Harmony for supplies, I noticed people watching me with new interest. The cashier at the general store mentioned rumors about the old Walker place hitting it big. When I asked who started these rumors, she shrugged and said only that folks were talking. Upon returning home, I found 3 voicemail messages from Thomas, each sounding more urgent than the last, all asking about the ranch and whether I'd found anything interesting there. Instead of calling him back, I decided to check my email. Among the condolence messages I hadn't had the heart to read was one from Amanda sent just 2 days earlier. The timestamp showed she had sent it at 3 in the morning. Dear Father Bernard, I want to apologize for my behavior at the will reading. Grief affects us all differently, and I spoke out of turn. Thomas and I are worried about you all alone in that big house. Why don't you come to dinner this Friday? We insist. Family should stick together during difficult times. With love, Amanda. The sudden shift from hostility to saccharine concern was jarring. More telling was the timing her email had been sent, just hours after the first industry rumors began circulating. I called Thomas back, accepting their dinner invitation without mentioning anything about my discoveries. The subtle change in his voice when I agreed to come relief, mingled with excitement, confirmed my suspicions further. Friday evening found me driving to their luxury home in Cherry Creek, a modernist structure of glass and steel that always felt more like a museum than a home. I brought nothing but a photo album of Margaret, curious to see how they would react. Amanda greeted me at the door, wearing an elegant black dress and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Father Bernard, we're so glad you could come. She air-kissed near my cheek, her expensive perfume momentarily overwhelming. Thomas hugged me briefly, awkwardly, before leading me to their formal dining room. The table was set with what I recognized as their most expensive china, used only for impressing important clients. Throughout dinner, Amanda was uncharacteristically attentive, refilling my water glass before it was empty and serving me the largest portions. Her questions, however, revealed her true interests. The ranch must be quite overwhelming to maintain alone, she began casually. Have you had a chance to really look around the property since you've been staying there? Just the usual maintenance, I replied vaguely. Margaret always loved that land. Yes, she was quite attached to it, Amanda said, exchanging a quick glance with Thomas. Did she ever mention why she was so interested in that particular property? It seemed so random, buying land in the middle of nowhere. Thomas attempted to appear casual. Mom did get pretty interested in the local geology in recent years. She mentioned something about unique rock formations on the property. Did she? I asked, watching my son carefully. I don't recall her discussing geology with you during your brief visits. Thomas flushed slightly. Oh, she mentioned it in emails. When I excused myself to use the restroom, I intentionally took a wrong turn, passing Thomas's home office. The door was ajar, revealing a computer screen with multiple browser tabs open to articles about rare earth mining and mineral rights in Wyoming. I continued to the bathroom, processing this new information. Returning through the hallway, I caught Amanda rifling through the pockets of my coat, which hung in the entryway. What exactly are you looking for, Amanda? I asked quietly. She startled, nearly dropping my keys. Oh, I was just hanging your coat properly. It was slipping. How thoughtful, I replied, taking my coat from her hands. Though I'm curious why proper coat hanging requires going through the pockets. Her face hardened momentarily before the pleasant mask returned. Don't be silly. I was just straightening things. Back at the dining table, I decided to test a theory. I've been consulting with George Winters about the ranch, I mentioned casually, watching their reactions. The recognition that flashed across Amanda's face was unmistakable. Thomas nearly choked on his wine. George Winters? Amanda repeated, trying to sound merely curious. Is he a real estate agent? No, I said simply, offering no further information. The tension in the room thickened. Finally, Amanda set down her fork with a sharp clink against the china. "Bernard, let's stop playing games. We know about the mineral deposits on the ranch property. Do you?" I kept my voice level. "And how exactly did you come by this information?" Amanda's composure cracked. "It's public knowledge now. Everyone's talking about it. The point is, that property should have gone to Thomas. He's Margaret's son, for heaven's sake. She was being spiteful, cutting him out like that." "Amanda," Thomas cautioned, looking uncomfortable. "No, Thomas. I'm tired of tiptoeing around this." Her voice rose as she turned back to me. "Your wife deliberately excluded her own son from his rightful inheritance. We have every right to contest that will. You believe you're entitled to the ranch now, that you know it's valuable," I stated. "Yet a week ago, you called it worthless and wanted nothing to do with it or me." "That's not fair," Thomas interjected weakly. "We didn't know." "Exactly." I cut him off. "You didn't know, but apparently someone did. I'm curious how you discovered the potential value of the mineral deposits, considering Margaret never told anyone about the survey results. Only I knew, and only after reading her private papers following her death." A heavy silence fell over the table. Amanda's eyes darted to Thomas, who looked increasingly distressed. "Everyone knows valuable deposits like that should belong to the next generation," Amanda finally blurted. "It's not right for you to control resources worth millions when you have no idea how to develop them properly." Her words hung in the air. I calmly set down my napkin and stood. "Margaret never told anyone about the survey results," I repeated quietly. "The only way you could know about them is if someone went through her private papers that were in her office at our home." Amanda's face flushed, deep red. Thomas stared at his plate. "Thank you for dinner," I said, retrieving my coat. "I think I'll be going now." As I headed for the door, Thomas followed me. "Dad, wait." On the porch, out of Amanda's earshot, he grabbed my arm. "I didn't know," he whispered urgently. "I swear, I didn't know she went through Mom's papers during the funeral. She told me she heard rumors from a realtor friend last week." I looked at my son, seeing both the man he had become and the boy he had once been. "Your mother protected that land for a reason, Thomas. She wanted it used responsibly, not stripped for maximum profit." "I know," he said, looking back at the house where Amanda stood watching through the window. I didn't know things would go this far." As I drove away, I glanced in my rearview mirror to see Thomas and Amanda engaged in what appeared to be a heated argument on their front porch. For the first time since Margaret's death, I felt a glimmer of hope that our son might eventually find his way back to the values we had raised him with. Upon returning to the ranch, I immediately noticed signs that someone had attempted to enter while I was away. The back door lock showed scratch marks, and a window screen had been partially removed. Nothing appeared to be missing, but the invasion of privacy was jarring nonetheless. The next morning, I drove to the hardware store in Harmony and purchased security cameras, which I installed at key points around the property. I also moved all of Margaret's documentation to a safer location and made digital backups of everything. George Winters connected me with a security company that specialized in protecting remote properties, and within days, the ranch had a comprehensive security system. "Better safe than sorry," George advised. "There's a lot at stake here." The phone calls intensified as word continued to spread. On one particularly busy Tuesday, my phone rang 62 times. Mining companies, developers, investors, and attorneys, all seeking information or offering partnerships that primarily benefited them. I let most calls go to voicemail, focusing instead on developing a responsible plan with George's guidance. Together, we created a business proposal that would allow for carefully controlled extraction of the minerals while preserving most of the natural landscape. The plan included provisions for hiring local workers, investing in community infrastructure, and eventually converting the majority of the land into a conservation trust. Margaret would approve, George said as we finalized the documents. This honors her vision completely. Thomas called several times that week, each conversation more strained than the last. Amanda and I are having some problems, he finally admitted during one call. She's obsessed with the ranch situation. She's already talked to 3 different attorneys about contesting the will. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, genuinely concerned for my son despite everything. But your mother's will is legally sound. I know, he sighed. Dad, can I ask, what exactly did you find? There are all these rumors, but nobody seems to know the specifics. I hesitated before answering carefully. The ranch property contains valuable mineral deposits that could be worth a considerable amount if developed properly. That's all I'm comfortable sharing right now. I understand, he said, though his disappointment was evident. Amanda's been difficult since we found out. She's convinced Mom did this to punish her specifically. Your mother made her decisions to protect what she valued, I replied. Including you, Thomas. A week later, I received formal notification that Amanda had filed a legal challenge to Margaret's will, claiming she had been not of sound mind when making her final arrangements. Franklin Wilson called immediately. This has no merit, Bernard, he assured me. I have extensive documentation of Margaret's mental clarity, including videos of our discussions about her wishes. But it will mean court appearances and legal fees. Whatever it takes, I told him. I won't dishonor Margaret's final wishes. The following Saturday morning, I was having coffee on the porch when a black luxury SUV came up the driveway. Thomas and Amanda emerged, both dressed as if for a business meeting rather than a visit to a ranch. Father Bernard, Amanda called out with false cheerfulness. Surprise visit. We thought you might be lonely out here, all by yourself. I invited them in, curious about their unannounced arrival. Amanda's eyes scanned every corner of the house as they entered, clearly searching for something. I had deliberately left some of Margaret's geological maps visible on the dining table, watching as Amanda's gaze fixed on them immediately. Coffee? I offered. That would be lovely, Amanda replied, her attention still on the maps. My, what interesting papers. Are those geological surveys? Just some of Margaret's research, I said vaguely. She was always curious about the history of this place. Throughout their visit, Amanda maintained a facade of caring concern, repeatedly calling me Father Bernard in a tone that managed to be both condescending and ingratiating. She offered to help organize Margaret's papers and suggested Thomas and I take a walk so she could tidy up a bit. That's very thoughtful, I said, but I prefer Margaret's things stay exactly as she left them. When I stepped into the kitchen to refill our coffee cups, I returned to find Amanda quickly slipping her phone back into her purse, the camera app still visible on the screen. On the table, the geological maps had been slightly rearranged. Did you just take photos of Margaret's private documents? I asked directly. What? No, I was just checking my emails, she stammered, but her guilty expression betrayed her. Amanda, I said quietly, I think it's time you dropped the act. Why are you really here? Her pleasant mask finally cracked completely. Fine. You want honesty? I think it's despicable that you're hoarding wealth that should rightfully belong to your son. Margaret deliberately cut Thomas out because she never approved of me, and you're perpetuating her spite. Amanda, Thomas interjected, clearly uncomfortable. No, Thomas. He needs to hear this. Her voice grew louder. Your precious Margaret was jealous of our success, our lifestyle. She couldn't stand that we built something better than you two ever had. I remained calm. Margaret built a life based on integrity, community, and genuine love. I'd hardly call that something to be jealous of. Oh, please, Amanda scoffed. You live in a modest house and drive a 10-year-old car. Now suddenly, you're sitting on millions in mineral rights that you'll probably waste on bird sanctuaries or whatever environmental project Margaret would have wanted. You don't deserve this. You'll just waste it. Her words hung in the air, revealing her true nature more clearly than any legal document could have. Thomas stared at his wife, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. That's enough, he said quietly. It's nowhere near enough. Amanda rounded on him. Did you know I've already spoken with Westridge Development? They're prepared to offer us 3 times market value once we get control of this property. Thomas's face paled. You what? When did you do that? Last week. Someone has to be proactive about our future. She turned back to me, her expression hard. Sign over the mineral rights to Thomas, or I swear he will never see a penny of my income again. We'll see how he likes living on a public defender's salary after I divorce him. The room fell completely silent. I looked at my son, standing at the crossroads of the man he had become and the man he was raised to be. I'm not the one who needs to make a choice here, Thomas, I said quietly. You are. Thomas looked between his wife and me, conflict evident in his expression. Then, with deliberate movements, he removed his wedding ring and placed it on the table. I should have seen who you really were years ago, he told Amanda, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. Mom knew. She tried to warn me, but I wouldn't listen. You can't be serious, Amanda hissed. You'd choose this worthless old man and his moral high ground over our life together, over everything we've built? What exactly have we built, Amanda? A showcase home we use to impress people we don't even like? A collection of status symbols that never made either of us happy? Thomas shook his head. I'm done. Amanda's face contorted with rage. You'll regret this. Both of you will. My father's firm has attorneys who will tear that will apart piece by piece. You haven't heard the last of me. She stormed out, the door slamming behind her. Thomas and I stood in silence, the weight of the moment settling around us. Finally, he spoke, his voice breaking. Dad, I'm so sorry. For everything. I know, son, I replied, placing my hand on his shoulder. Mom knew all along, didn't she? He asked. She was protecting me from Amanda. From myself, really. I nodded, going to Margaret's desk to retrieve her letters. Your mother saw things clearly, even at the end. Here, these were meant for you too. As Thomas read Margaret's words, tears streamed down his face. When he finished, he looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. I don't deserve your forgiveness, either of you. Forgiveness isn't about deserving, son. It's about healing. And it's time we both started that process. Outside, we heard Amanda's SUV speed away, gravel spraying from beneath the tires. The sound seemed to mark the end of one chapter and the tentative beginning of another for our fractured family. 6 months passed, bringing profound changes to both the ranch and our lives. Thomas moved into the guest house on the property, initially as a temporary measure after his separation from Amanda, but gradually making it his permanent home. Our relationship, damaged by years of distance and recent betrayal, began healing through shared work and honest conversations. With George Winter's guidance, we established the Margaret Walker Foundation for Environmental Research and Responsible Resource Development. The organization's mission reflected Margaret's values: to demonstrate how natural resources could be utilized while preserving the integrity of the land and benefiting local communities. The first extraction project began under strict environmental protocols, with a portion of the initial profits funding scholarships for local students pursuing careers in environmental science or sustainable agriculture. The foundation also purchased the abandoned lumber mill in Harmony, converting it into a research center that created 30 new jobs. Amanda's lawsuit against the estate failed spectacularly. Franklin Wilson presented irrefutable evidence of Margaret's mental competence, including video recordings of their will discussions. More damaging to Amanda's case were the text messages and emails discovered during legal discovery, revealing her plans to sell the property to developers as soon as it came under her control. The professional fallout for Amanda was swift. Her law firm, upon learning of her unethical behavior, placed her on indefinite leave, pending an internal investigation. Several clients withdrew their business upon hearing rumors of her attempted manipulation of a widow's estate. Thomas, freed from Amanda's influence, reconnected with his authentic self. He resigned from his position at the corporate law firm and began establishing a small practice specializing in environmental law. The transition meant a significant reduction in income, but as he told me one evening while we sat on the porch watching the sunset, I haven't felt this peaceful since college. I focused my energy on renovating the ranch house, as Margaret had always wanted, creating a warm, welcoming space that honored her memory while looking toward the future. The secret basement laboratory became a proper office for the foundation, with Margaret's research prominently displayed as a testament to her foresight and intelligence. On what would have been our 46th wedding anniversary, Thomas and I visited Margaret's grave together. I placed wildflowers, never store-bought, beside her headstone and told her about our progress. "You were right about everything, my love," I said softly. "The land, Amanda, what Thomas needed. Your plan worked perfectly." Thomas knelt beside me. "I'm sorry I didn't listen to you sooner, Mom, but I'm trying to make up for it now." That evening, Thomas surprised me by asking if he could bring someone to dinner the following weekend. "Her name is Elaine," he explained, a hint of nervousness in his voice. "She's a botanist, working on prairie restoration. We met at the research center. When they arrived for dinner, I was struck by the contrast between Elaine and Amanda. Where Amanda had been polished and perfect, Elaine was natural and authentic, arriving in practical clothes with soil still under her fingernails from the day's fieldwork. Her laugh was genuine, her interest in the ranch sincere, and her respect for Margaret's vision evident in thoughtful questions about the foundation's work. As the months progressed, our careful development of the mineral resources provided funds beyond what either Margaret or I could have imagined. Following her wishes outlined in her letters, we preserved 80% of the ranch as natural habitat, created a conservation easement to protect it in perpetuity, and focused extraction activities on a small section that could be fully restored afterward. The wealth Margaret had discovered gave me new purpose in my twilight years. Beyond the foundation and scholarships, we established a fund to help the local hospital upgrade its cancer treatment facilities, ensuring rural residents wouldn't have to travel hours for care, as Margaret had done. Through it all, I came to understand the profound wisdom of my wife's final gift. She hadn't just protected the land or secured our financial future. She had rescued our son from a toxic relationship and restored our family bonds when they seemed broken beyond repair. One evening, as Thomas and I sorted through old photographs for a foundation display, he paused over a picture of Margaret taken on the day we purchased the ranch. "You know what amazes me most about Mom?" he said thoughtfully. "She could have told everyone about the minerals as soon as she discovered them. You both could have enjoyed the wealth together while she was still alive. But she didn't," I finished for him, "because she understood that some things are more valuable than money." "Like integrity," Thomas nodded. "And family." "Exactly." I smiled, recognizing in my son's face the values Margaret and I had tried to instill. Greed destroys from within, but patience and principle reveal the true treasures in life. As I look back now on the journey from that painful will reading to today, I'm filled with gratitude for Margaret's foresight and love. The cruel words Amanda spoke that day, "Get out of our lives and keep that old ranch," had unintentionally granted us the greatest gift possible: freedom from toxic influence and the opportunity to rebuild what truly matters. I often wonder, as you might be wondering now, what treasures in your own life have you overlooked while chasing what glitters? What relationships might be suffering while you pursue material success? I hope my story inspires you to examine what truly matters in your own journey. If this story resonated with you, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to hear more reflections from my many years of life experience. Share this with someone who might be struggling with family conflict or difficult decisions about their future. And I'd love to read your comments about a time when patience rewarded you in unexpected ways. Until next time, remember that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the integrity with which you live your life.